Most people think they know what wealth looks like. They think it has a number, a salary, a lifestyle, a visible outcome that proves you're doing well. They think once they cross a certain income threshold, something inside them will finally relax. The pressure will lift. The anxiety will fade. Life will feel stable. That belief is so common it feels obvious. And it's wrong. Not wrong in a motivational way. Wrong in a structural way. Because if income automatically created wealth, then people who make more would feel safer, calmer, less stressed. But that's not what we see. In fact, the opposite is often true. The more people earn, the more fragile their lives become. More obligations. More expectations. More things that must keep working perfectly or everything collapses. Yet we keep telling ourselves the same story. If I just made more money. If I could just get ahead a little. If I could just reach that next level. Those thoughts don't come from greed. They come from fear. From the belief that where you are now isn't secure enough to stand on. And that belief didn't appear on its own. You were taught it. From the beginning, money was framed as the solution to uncertainty. Do well in school so you can get a good job. Get a good job so you can make good money. Make good money so you can have a good life. Notice what's missing from that chain. Stability. No one explains how to create it. They just assume it arrives once the income is high enough. That's the first belief that needs to be disrupted. Income is not stability. Income is exposure. The higher it goes without structure, the more fragile your life becomes. Because now you have more to lose, more to maintain, more to protect. More moving parts that can break. And the worst part is how long it takes to realize this. People chase income for years, sometimes decades, before noticing that their stress hasn't decreased. It's just changed shape. It's become more sophisticated, more hidden, more expensive. They don't feel rich. They feel trapped at a higher level. That's not a failure of effort. That's a failure of belief. Here's the second belief that quietly controls everything. That money problems are a personal flaw. That if you're anxious about money, it's because you're bad with it. Undisciplined. Irresponsible. Behind. So people carry shame instead of curiosity. They assume everyone else has it figured out. That the discomfort they feel is proof they're doing something wrong. But look closer. Look at how many people feel fine on paper but can't miss a paycheck. How many people look successful but live one surprise away from panic. How many people earn more than they ever imagined and still feel tense opening their banking app. That's not individual failure. That's a system that trains people to equate earning with safety, while ignoring everything that actually creates it. And when people sense that disconnect, something subtle happens emotionally. They stop trusting themselves. They assume the problem is their motivation, so they push harder. Or they assume it's their intelligence, so they look for better advice. Or they assume it's their discipline, so they punish themselves. Very few people stop and question the premise itself. Very few people ask whether the goal they're chasing actually leads where they think it does. That's the third belief that needs to be challenged. That wealth is something you reach. As if it's a destination. A finish line. A future version of life where everything finally works. Wealth isn't a place you arrive at. It's a condition you build. And most people are building the opposite without realizing it. They're building dependence instead of independence. Fragility instead of resilience. Stress instead of margin. Not because they're careless, but because they're following instructions that were never designed to produce peace. Here are the two false assumptions hiding underneath all of this. The first is that making more money fixes bad structure. Doesn't. It hides it. More income doesn't repair weak foundations. Puts weight on them. It delays consequences. It gives you the illusion of progress while quietly increasing risk. That's why financial stress often spikes after promotions instead of disappearing. Why lifestyle upgrades feel exciting and terrifying at the same time. Why people feel pressure to keep earning once they cross certain thresholds. They didn't build freedom. They built a bigger machine that needs to be fed. The second false assumption is that wealth is visible. That the people who look comfortable are the ones who are comfortable. That confidence comes from what you can show. But real financial safety doesn't show itself. It removes itself. It removes urgency. Removes fear. Removes the need to explain your choices. Removes the pressure to keep up. You don't notice it because nothing is demanding your attention. That's why so many people miss it entirely. They're chasing a feeling they can't see, using tools that make it less likely they'll ever experience it. And this is where the emotional buy-in happens. Because if any of this feels familiar, if you've worked hard, done what you were supposed to do, and still feel uneasy, it's not because you're failing. It's because the rules you were given don't lead where you were told they would. That realization is uncomfortable, but it's also relieving, because it means the tension you feel isn't random. It's a signal, a quiet warning that something in the equation doesn't add up. And here's the looming promise, the part that matters most. There is one lesson that changes everything. Not a trick, not a hack, not a shortcut, a structural truth that flips the entire relationship between money and fear. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you apply it, the pressure begins to unwind. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily and permanently. This lesson doesn't make you rich quickly. It makes you unshakable slowly. And before you can hear it, the old beliefs have to loosen their grip. Because you can't build real wealth on top of assumptions that were never true to begin with. So for now, don't look for advice. Don't look for tactics. Don't look for solutions. Just notice the tension. Notice how long you've been told that income equals safety, and how little evidence there is that it actually does. That awareness is where everything starts. Most people don't wake up thinking they're bad with money. They wake up tired. They wake up already calculating the day before their feet hit the floor. What time they need to leave. How much gas is left. Whether they can afford to stop for coffee, or if that's one of those small things they're supposed to feel guilty about. They scroll their phone half awake. See someone else living a life that looks lighter, cleaner, more spacious, and they tell themselves they'll figure it out eventually. Then they get up and do what they've always done. They go to work. They answer emails. They show up on time. They try not to complain. They tell themselves they're being responsible. They're doing everything they were told would work. And somehow it still feels like they're falling behind. The salary hits the account on the same days every month. It's predictable, stable, respectable. Not exciting but not terrible either. Enough to survive. Enough to function. Enough to feel like you shouldn't be struggling. That's the part no one wants to admit. Because struggling on a small salary feels like failure. But struggling on a decent one feels like shame. You're not reckless. You're not careless. You're not living wildly. You pay your bills. You don't miss rent. You don't blow money on luxury for no reason. You do the math. You make trade-offs. You say no more than you say yes. And still there's no air. Every month feels tight. Not catastrophic, just narrow. Like life is happening in a hallway instead of an open room. There's no margin. No buffer. No room for mistakes, surprises, or bad luck. A flat tire becomes a problem. A medical bill becomes a crisis. A missed paycheck becomes a spiral. You don't talk about it because everyone else looks like they're doing fine. You assume they figure something out you haven't. Or that you're just not disciplined enough yet. Not optimized enough. Not hustling hard enough. So you internalize it. You tell yourself once you make a little more, things will relax. Once you get that raise. Once you switch jobs. Once you finally feel like an adult. But the raise comes and the relief doesn't. Because the system is quiet. It doesn't attack you. It invites you. Credit cards don't show up with warnings. They show up with points and rewards and limited time offers. By now, pay later doesn't sound dangerous. Sounds helpful. Financing doesn't feel like debt when it's broken into monthly numbers small enough to ignore. You don't notice the trap being set because it doesn't feel like a trap. Feels like participation. You move to a slightly better place because it feels like progress. You upgrade the car because it's safer, more reliable, more adult. You justify subscriptions because they're cheap individually. You say yes to lifestyle upgrades not because you're greedy, but because you're tired of feeling behind. And slowly and visibly your life inflates to match your income. Not in dramatic ways. In quiet ones. A little more rent. A little more insurance. A little more convenience. A little less cooking. A little more delivery. A little less patience. A little more I deserve this. None of it feels irresponsible. Feels normal. That's the danger. Lifestyle creep isn't loud. It whispers. Tells you this is what stability looks like. This is what everyone does. This is what success feels like. until the anxiety shows up. Not panic, not fear, just a constant hum, a low-level tension that never fully turns off. You check your account more than you want to admit. You avoid opening certain emails. You hesitate before making plans. You feel a tightness when money comes up in conversation. You're doing everything right, yet you don't feel safe. That's the emotional contradiction no one prepares you for. Because the story we're told is simple. Work hard, be responsible, and eventually things will settle. But for a lot of people, they never do. The numbers go up, but the pressure doesn't go down. And that pressure does something subtle to your mind. It makes you cautious in the wrong places and reckless in others. You avoid long-term planning because it feels overwhelming. You indulge short-term relief because it feels earned. You oscillate between discipline and exhaustion, never quite building momentum in either direction. You start to believe this is just adulthood. That stress is normal. That money anxiety is the price of living. That everyone feels this way and you're weak for wanting something different. That belief is the real villain. Not your salary. Not your spending. Not your intelligence. The conditioning. The system was never designed to make you feel secure. It was designed to make you functional. Just stable enough to keep going. Just uncomfortable enough to keep consuming. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people miss. Small salaries don't cause financial stress. They reveal it. When you don't make much, there's nowhere to hide. Every decision shows up immediately. Every mistake is visible. Every trade-off is felt. On a large salary, problems get delayed. On a small one, they get exposed. That's why people with modest incomes often understand money better than people who make more. They're forced to. They can't outsource mistakes to future income. They can't rely on bonuses or windfalls to erase bad decisions. Reality shows up on time every time. There's something honest about that. Painful but honest. A small salary strips away illusion. It forces you to confront the gap between what life costs and what life gives back. It doesn't let you pretend you're fine when you're not. And that's why this stage matters. Not because it's where you fail, but because it's where clarity begins. If you're here feeling tight, frustrated, quietly anxious, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're awake enough to notice the pressure. That discomfort isn't a sign you're losing. It's a signal you're paying attention. And curiosity is the first thing that replaces frustration when you finally stop blaming yourself and start questioning the system you were handed. You're not behind. You're just early in seeing the truth. Hard work is the promise most people build their lives on. It's the first rule you're taught, long before money ever becomes real. Work hard in school. Work hard at your job. Work hard and things will work out. Sounds fair, clean, moral. It gives you a sense of control in a world that rarely offers it. And for a long time it even feels true. You show up early. You stay late. You volunteer when others don't. You take pride in being dependable. You tell yourself that effort compounds, that someone is watching, that consistency will eventually be rewarded. So when things don't improve, the natural conclusion isn't that the rule is wrong. It's that you're not doing enough. That belief is powerful and dangerous, because hard work does pay off, just not in the way people expect. It builds skills. It builds reliability. It builds endurance. What it doesn't guarantee is financial safety. And that gap between effort and outcome is where the pressure starts to build. Most people aren't lazy. They're exhausted. They've already given their best hours to someone else's priorities. They've already spent their energy solving problems that don't follow them home in the form of ownership or leverage. They work hard inside systems that cap upside and outsource risk downward. And yet they keep going. Because stopping feels like failure. The myth isn't that hard work is useless. The myth is that hard work alone is enough. No one talks about the difference between income and margin. Income is what you earn. Margin is what's left after life takes its share. You can increase income and still lose margin. In fact, many people do. They earn more, but expenses rise faster. Taxes bite harder. Expectations grow heavier. The lifestyle expands to meet the new number. And suddenly the extra money feels invisible. That's when confusion sets in. You did what you were supposed to do. You climbed. You progressed. And somehow, you're still standing on the same financial ground, just with better furniture and higher stakes. Margin is fragile. And modern life attacks it relentlessly. Rent adjusts upward. Insurance recalculates. Healthcare shifts. Subscriptions multiply quietly. Convenience becomes necessity. Time becomes scarce, so money fills the gaps. Delivery, outsourcing, speed. None of this feels indulgent. Feels efficient. Necessary. Reasonable. Until the pressure returns. Because margin isn't just money. It's emotional space. It's the ability to absorb surprises without panic. It's the distance between inconvenience and disaster. And for a lot of people, that distance is shrinking no matter how hard they work. This is where comparison culture enters like gasoline on a slow fire. You don't just measure yourself against your past anymore. You measure yourself against everyone. Friends, strangers, influencers, people your age who seem ahead, younger people doing better, older people who look calmer. Social media doesn't show effort. It shows outcomes. It compresses timelines. It makes success look fast and failure look invisible. You don't see the debt, the anxiety, the support systems, the luck. You just see the highlight reel and assume you're falling behind in real time. That comparison is exhausting because it never ends. There's always someone earning more, traveling more, upgrading faster. And when you're already working hard, that constant exposure doesn't motivate, it drains. Especially when layered with generational anxiety. You were told to follow the rules. Many did. And the rules changed mid-game. Housing costs rose faster than wages. Education got more expensive while paying less. Stability became conditional. Benefits became optional. Security became something you were supposed to build alone, without the tools previous generations had. So when older advice tells you to just work harder, it doesn't land. Because you already are. And the math doesn't close. That's where resentment starts to creep in. Not loud, not explosive, but heavy. A sense that something is unfair, even if you can't quite name it. That you're running on a treadmill that speeds up every time you adjust your stride. This is the point where people break in different directions. Some double down. More hours. More hustle. Less sleep. They trade health for hope, convinced the breakthrough is one push away. Others disengage emotionally. They stop caring. Do the minimum. Numb themselves with distractions. Tell themselves money doesn't matter, even as it quietly controls their choices. Neither path leads to peace. Because the problem isn't effort. It's structure. Hard work inside a system that doesn't reward ownership creates burnout, not freedom. Effort without leverage creates fatigue, not security. And no one warns you about the emotional cost of that realization. It's not anger. It's weariness. A kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. A low-level grief for a future you were promised but can't quite reach. You start to feel older than your age. You stop planning far ahead because it feels unrealistic. You keep life small because expansion feels risky. This is where people start saying things like, "I'll deal with it later," even though later never comes. And here's the cruel irony. This is often the stage right before people reach financial milestones that are supposed to feel good. The first big salary. The first 6 figures. The number everyone says will change everything. But when it arrives, something unsettling happens. The stress doesn't disappear. It mutates. The bills are bigger. The commitment's heavier. The fear more sophisticated. You have more to lose now, and the pressure adjusts accordingly. That's why so many people quietly admit something they never say out loud. Hitting that number didn't make them happier. It made them more afraid. Afraid of falling back. Afraid of being exposed. Afraid of realizing too late that they built a life that requires constant effort just to maintain. That's the cliffhanger no one prepares you for. The moment you realize that even the milestone you were chasing might not be the exit. That realization doesn't make you hopeless. It makes you alert. Because if hard work alone doesn't guarantee safety, then something else must matter more. And once you see that, you're finally ready to listen. Not for motivation but for truth. The first $100,000 is where people get confused. Not because it's easy to reach, but because when it finally starts to take shape, it doesn't feel like anything at all. There's no fireworks. No shift in identity. No sudden sense of arrival. Just numbers on a screen that don't seem to match the effort it took to get there. This is where frustration peaks. You've been disciplined. You've said no. You've sacrificed. You've watched others spend freely while you held back. And when you check the balance, it feels Underwhelming. Like the reward didn't scale with the work. That's because early progress is invisible by design. Compounding doesn't announce itself at the beginning. It whispers. It works quietly in the background while your brain is still wired for effort-based rewards. And that mismatch is where most people lose faith. We're conditioned to believe progress should be obvious. Promotions come with titles. Raises show up on paychecks. Effort creates visible outcomes. But savings doesn't behave that way. Investing doesn't either. First, it feels static. Slow. Almost insulting. You put away thousands and it barely moves. You do the math and realize how long it will take to reach something meaningful. The timeline stretches out and doubt creeps in. This is where people start questioning everything. Is this even worth it? Am I doing something wrong? Why does this feel so pointless? That questioning isn't weakness. It's human. Our brains evolved to respond to immediate feedback. We're not wired to celebrate delayed outcomes. And the first $100,000 sits right in the dead zone where effort is high and reward is subtle. Nothing dramatic changes yet. Your life doesn't look different. Your choices don't feel freer. Your stress isn't gone. So emotionally, it feels like stagnation. But something critical is happening beneath the surface. The first $100,000 isn't about growth. It's about insulation. It's the stage where money stops being fragile and starts becoming stable. Where your financial life transitions from reactive to intentional. Where emergencies become inconveniences instead of catastrophes. The problem is that shift doesn't feel like progress. Feels like patience. And patience is emotionally expensive. This is why quitting feels logical here. Not impulsive, logical. People don't quit because they're lazy. They quit because the feedback loop breaks. The effort no longer feels connected to outcome. And when humans lose that connection, motivation collapses. So they pause contributions. They redirect money toward things that provide immediate relief. They tell themselves they'll come back to it later. Later rarely comes. This creates a painful cycle. You try. You save. You wait. You feel nothing. You stop. You spend. You feel temporary relief. Then anxiety returns. Then guilt. Then avoidance. Over time, this cycle teaches a dangerous lesson. That discipline doesn't work. But discipline wasn't the problem. The order was. Most people try to grow money before they've built safety. They chase returns before they've secured stability. They expect growth to calm their nervous system when what they actually need is predictability. That's why the first $100,000 feels so hard. It's not exciting money. It's defensive money. It's money that sits there quietly, doing nothing visible, while doing everything important. It buys you time. It buys you options. It buys you the ability to pause instead of panic. But because it doesn't announce itself, people underestimate it. They compare it to stories of overnight success, to screenshots of explosive growth, to people who claim massive returns in short windows. And that comparison erodes confidence. Impatience sets in. You start feeling late, behind, like you missed something everyone else figured out. The temptation to shortcut grows. Riskier ideas start sounding reasonable. Slow progress starts feeling like failure. This is where many people abandon the path entirely, not because it doesn't work, but because it doesn't perform emotionally. They want reassurance, proof, validation. But compounding doesn't perform. It accumulates. It's boring at first because it's foundational. It's laying groundwork you won't appreciate until much later. Like sleep or health or trust. It only becomes obvious when it's missing. And here's the reversal most people don't see until too late. The first $100,000 isn't where money starts working for you. It's where you stop working against yourself. Once you reach it, your behavior changes. You make calmer decisions. You take fewer desperate risks. You stop reacting emotionally to short-term noise. Your time horizon stretches. You're no longer trying to win quickly. You're trying to stay stable long enough for momentum to build. That's the psychological shift that matters. Because after that point, progress stops being invisible. The next milestones come faster, not because you work harder, but because the base is finally strong enough to support growth. Compounding starts showing up. The curve bends. Patience begins to pay rent. But none of that happens if you quit early. And most people quit right before things start to make sense. That's why this stage dissolves shame. It reframes the struggle. It explains why stopping felt reasonable, why doubt crept in, why motivation collapsed. Nothing was wrong with you. You were standing in the quiet part of the process, the part no one celebrates, the part no one posts about, the part that determines everything that comes after. Once you understand that, behavior changes naturally, not out of discipline but out of clarity. You stop chasing feelings. You stop rushing timelines. You stop measuring progress by excitement. You start measuring it by stability. Most people think money problems come from not making enough. But the real damage happens much earlier. At the moment money enters their life and immediately leaves it. The order is wrong. Money comes in and before it ever has a chance to protect you, it's already been claimed. Rent grabs it. Bills grab it. Subscriptions grab it. Lifestyle grabs it. What's left, if anything, is treated as optional, accidental, negotiable. Savings becomes whatever survives the month. That order quietly guarantees stress. Because when savings comes last, it's always under attack. It has to compete with urgency, emotion, exhaustion, and justification. And it loses every time. Paying yourself first isn't a trick. It's not a hack. It's a declaration of priority. It says, my future stability outranks my present comfort. That sounds simple. It isn't. Because paying yourself first forces a confrontation with identity. When you save first, you're not just moving money. You're choosing who you are. You're deciding that you are someone who protects themselves. Someone who doesn't rely on luck. Someone who doesn't wait to feel safe before acting like it. Most people don't avoid saving because they can't. They avoid it because it exposes discomfort immediately. It removes the illusion that everything is fine. It forces you to live within what remains. And that's why it works. The moment savings is automatic, behavior adjusts around it. Not the other way around. You don't magically become disciplined. You become constrained. And constraints shape behavior better than motivation ever will. When money leaves your account before you can touch it, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking, should I save this month? You already did. That shift is everything. Because once savings is no longer a decision, the emotional load disappears. There's no guilt, no mental math, no shame spiral at the end of the month. Just structure. And structure creates calm. This is where identity changes quietly. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to get ahead. You start seeing yourself as someone who is already in control. That internal authority matters more than any spreadsheet. People overestimate math and underestimate behavior. They think better numbers will fix them. But numbers don't act under pressure. People do. Automation wins because it removes pressure entirely. When savings happens automatically, you don't have to be strong. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be motivated. The system does the work. And systems outperform intentions every time. This is also where small salaries reveal their hidden advantage. When you don't make much, automation forces clarity fast. You feel the constraint immediately. You learn to adapt quickly. You learn what actually matters. High incomes can hide inefficiency for years. Low incomes expose it instantly. That exposure isn't a disadvantage. It's feedback. It teaches you how to live beneath your means before your means grow. It trains restraint before excess arrives. It builds habits that scale. Most people do the opposite. They wait to save until they feel comfortable. They wait until income rises. They wait until life settles down. Life doesn't settle down. Waiting creates a moving target that's never reached. Paying yourself first flips the script. It doesn't wait for certainty. Creates it. And here's the part people resist the most. This isn't about optimizing. It's about accepting limits. Paying yourself first means admitting you can't have everything. It means choosing long-term peace over short-term ease. It means letting some wants go unmet without justifying or apologizing. That's not deprivation. That's maturity. Once this system is in place, something subtle happens. Your confidence increases, not because you're richer, but because you're predictable to yourself. You trust your future actions. You trust your systems. You trust that you won't sabotage yourself under stress. That trust reduces anxiety more than income ever could. You start making decisions from a place of stability instead of urgency. You stop chasing fixes. You stop reacting emotionally to money conversations. You become calmer. And calm is leverage. Because when you're calm, you don't overspend to soothe yourself. You don't chase returns out of impatience. You don't follow noise. You don't panic when things fluctuate. You stay focused. Paying yourself first isn't about becoming wealthy fast. It's about becoming unshakable early. It turns money from something that controls you into something that supports you. Quietly. Consistently. Without drama. Once the order is right, everything else becomes easier, not because life changes but because you do. And that's the real reveal. Not a tactic. A transformation. Debt doesn't feel dangerous at first. Feels helpful. Convenient. Temporary. Feels like a bridge between who you are and who you're supposed to become. A way to smooth the gap. A way to participate now and pay later, when things are easier, when you're stronger, when you're there. That's the lie that makes debt so effective. Because debt isn't money you borrowed. It's time you already promised away. Every dollar of debt is a claim on your future hours. On mornings you haven't lived yet. On choices you haven't made yet. On freedom you haven't earned yet. And the scary part is how quietly it accumulates. You don't feel it when you swipe. You don't feel it when the approval goes through. You feel it months later, years later, when your life feels heavier than it should. When options disappear without explanation. When every decision has a cost that wasn't there before. Debt steals time before it steals money. It narrows your future without announcing itself. It turns flexibility into obligation. It turns opportunity into risk. It turns I could into I can't. And because the payments are spread out, normalized, broken into manageable chunks, you don't experience it as theft. You experience it as adulthood. That's how it hides. Most people don't realize how much of their life is already spoken for. How many hours they've committed to things they no longer care about. How much effort goes into maintaining decisions made by a past version of themselves who didn't understand the cost. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to admit. Because admitting it means confronting ego. Status is the silent partner in almost every bad financial decision. Not flashy status. Not luxury for the sake of luxury. Everyday status. Respectability. Belonging. Looking like you're doing fine. Status is the reason people upgrade too early. The reason they stretch for neighborhoods, cars, vacations, wardrobes that feel just slightly out of reach. Not because they need them, but because they don't want to look like they don't. Status whispers that slowing down means falling behind. That restraint means failure. That saying no means you couldn't handle it. And debt offers to protect that image. Debt lets you look successful while you're still figuring things out. It lets you blend in. It lets you avoid uncomfortable questions, from others and from yourself. But it charges interest on the illusion. Every month you pay to keep a version of yourself alive that you don't actually need to be. And that's where the emotional weight comes from. Not the balance. The pretending. Carrying debt forces you to care about things longer than you want to. Jobs you'd leave. Cities you'd move from. Lifestyles you'd outgrow. You keep going not because it's right, but because stopping would expose the truth. So you push forward. You tell yourself it's normal. Everyone does this. It'll work out. But deep down something tightens. Because freedom and status pull in opposite directions. Freedom asks, what do I actually want? Status asks, how will this look? Freedom is quiet. Status is loud. Freedom doesn't impress anyone at dinner. Status does. Freedom doesn't get likes. Status does. Freedom doesn't announce itself. Status demands witnesses. And in a culture that rewards visibility, it's easy to confuse the two. Lifestyle inflation doesn't arrive all at once. It inches forward, one upgrade at a time. Each one justified. Each one affordable on its own. Each one harmless in isolation. Until suddenly your life requires your income. Not supports it. Requires it. That's the danger zone. Because once your lifestyle depends on a certain level of income, your tolerance for risk collapses. You can't step back. You can't pause. You can't experiment. You can't breathe. You've built a cage out of comforts. And the hardest part is realizing that no one forced you into it. You chose it slowly, reasonably, with good intentions. That's why this moment hurts. Because the last resistance to change isn't logic. It's pride. It's the part of you that doesn't want to admit you chased the wrong signals. That mistook admiration for happiness. That confused appearing successful with being safe. Letting go of that hurts. Feels like shrinking. Like losing ground. Like stepping backward. But it's not regression. It's release. The choice isn't between success and failure. It's between ego and peace. Between impressing and resting. Between maintaining an image and reclaiming your time. And this is the moment where things get very quiet inside. Because once you see debt as stolen time, status loses its grip. The cost becomes too clear to ignore. No object, no upgrade, no appearance is worth trading away years of your future attention. You start asking different questions. Not, can I afford this? But what does this cost me in freedom? Not, will people notice? But will this make my life heavier or lighter? Those questions don't lead to dramatic decisions. They lead to calm ones. You stop inflating your life to keep up. You stop borrowing from tomorrow to feel okay today. You stop needing to win. And something surprising happens. Your patience increases. Because once ego steps aside, time stops feeling like an enemy. You're no longer racing to prove something. You're no longer in a hurry to arrive. You're building something quieter, stronger. Not a life that looks impressive, but one that feels stable. And that's the peak. Not excitement. Not adrenaline. Resolve. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that can wait. Because you finally understand what's at stake. Not money. Your time. Your choices. Your life. Quiet wealth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a feeling. It doesn't post milestones. It doesn't demand recognition. Most of the time, it doesn't even feel like progress while it's happening. That's why it works. By the time it's visible, the work is already done. The system itself is almost boring. Money comes in. A portion leaves immediately to protect the future. The rest is allowed to support the present. There's no negotiation, no drama, no constant recalculation. The structure holds even when motivation fades, even when life gets noisy, even when emotions fluctuate. Income rises and the system stays the same. Income falls and the system stays the same. That consistency is the point. Because wealth isn't built by intensity. It's built by inevitability. When saving happens first, spending naturally adapts. When spending adapts, stress lowers. When stress lowers, decisions improve. And when decisions improve, mistakes shrink. Over time, that loop compounds just as reliably as money does. Nothing heroic is required. No perfect discipline. No constant optimization. Just repetition. The system doesn't ask you to predict the future. It doesn't care about timing. It doesn't require you to be right often. It only requires that you don't sabotage yourself when things feel uncertain. That's what quiet wealth protects you from. It protects you from panic decisions. From emotional spending. From chasing narratives that promise speed but demand risk. From reacting to noise instead of responding to reality. Over long enough timelines, that protection becomes power. Not power over others. Power over your own life. You begin to notice subtle changes. Not dramatic ones. Small ones. You sleep better. You don't flinch when unexpected expenses show up. You stop refreshing accounts obsessively. You stop feeling pressure to explain your choices. You stop comparing timelines. Money becomes background instead of foreground. That's when time expands. When money anxiety fades, attention returns. You think more clearly. You plan further ahead. You choose patience because you're no longer desperate for outcomes. You're no longer trying to compress life into shortcuts. The system creates distance between you and urgency. And urgency is the enemy of good decisions. Quiet wealth doesn't promise happiness. It promises stability. And stability creates the conditions where happiness can exist without being fragile. Nothing feels urgent because nothing is. That's the feeling people chase when they chase money. Not luxury. Not admiration. Relief. Relief from needing things to go right all the time. Relief from constant pressure. Relief from living one mistake away from panic. The system gives you that relief slowly, then all at once. First, it's barely noticeable. Then one day something goes wrong. And it doesn't derail you. You handle it. Calmly. Without drama. And that's when you realize something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer reactive. You're resilient. That's the inevitability. Over decades, boring consistency beats dramatic effort. Structure beats talent. Patience beats brilliance. The people who build quiet wealth aren't exceptional. They're predictable. They don't win big. They don't lose big. They don't gamble their future on moments. They let time do what time does best. And time always favors stability. The final realization is simple, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Money doesn't change who you are. It amplifies what you already built. If your life is chaotic, more money adds scale to the chaos. If your system is calm, more money deepens the calm. Quiet wealth is just the byproduct of a calm system applied for a long time. Nothing dramatic happens at the end. No finish line. No moment of arrival. Just a steady sense that life is manageable. That the future isn't threatening. That you're no longer negotiating with fear. You don't feel rich. You feel prepared. And that feeling doesn't fade because it's not based on numbers. It's based on structure. That's why this path works even when nothing exciting is happening. Especially then. Because in the end, the most powerful financial position isn't abundance. It's inevitability. A system so steady, so boring, so well aligned with reality that success stops being a question. It just becomes a matter of time.